In the medieval world, gold and silver were never just metals. They were belief cast into form, faith, authority and ambition hammered into shine. From the Venetian Ducat to the Islamic Dinar, every realm saw its coin as a miniature world order, stamped with divine legitimacy and mortal power. But across a continent torn by faiths, wars and empires, only a few coins truly crossed borders, carrying trust from London to Cairo. One question haunted the traders and kings of that age. Which currency held the world together, and why did its gleam outlast kingdoms? To understand that, one must see money not as metal, but as meaning. In the Middle Ages, a coin was a proclamation. Each kingdom, duchy, or free city struck its own, etched with crosses or crowns, saints or sovereigns, symbols that promised value in a world without a central rule. But those promises clashed. The result was chaos. Thousands of coins, all different in weight, purity and worth, jostling side by side in market stalls and merchant ships. Europe was divided not just by language and law, but by metal. In the north, silver reigned. In the south, gold held court. And yet, what gave a coin true worth was not its metal, but the belief behind it. A merchant in Genoa would accept a Byzantine Solidus, or an Islamic Dinar not for their design but for their reputation, the guarantee of purity, the strength of the empire behind them, the whisper of stability in an uncertain age. Every coin, no matter where it came from, carried a silent assurance. This will be accepted, this will endure. Trade routes became the veins of this belief. Caravans crossed deserts, ships braved tempests, and markets from Bruges to Alexandria glittered with currencies from distant lands. Coins passed through hands that could not speak the same tongue, yet understood the same promise. In that silent exchange, trust became a universal language. Out of this fragile web of faith and commerce rose the great currencies. Coins whose names would echo across centuries. They were more than instruments of trade, they were foundations of civilization. The first among them was the Byzantine Solidus, or numisma, born in the 4th century under Emperor Constantine. Forged from almost pure gold, 24 carats, it stood as one of history's most unwavering currencies. For over 7 centuries, its weight and purity scarcely changed, a miracle of discipline in an age of decay. From the British Isles to Baghdad, merchants treated it as their own, confident that the Solidus was as incorruptible as the empire that minted it. Its secret was faith, not in gods alone, but in governance. While Western kings debased their mints to finance endless wars, Constantinople guarded its coinage as if it were holy scripture. On one side of the Solidus shone the emperor's visage, on the other Christ himself, divine sanction sealed in metal. To hold it was to hold a fragment of heaven and empire together. It was both theology and economy, a promise that order could still exist amidst the crumbling world of feudal chaos. The Solidus travelled with imperial tax collectors, traders, and emissaries. It crossed seas and deserts, paid mercenaries, built cathedrals, and adorned altars. Even raiders who burned monasteries demanded payment in Solidus, preferring divine gold to their own plunder. It was the pulse of Mediterranean commerce, the last golden echo of Rome in a darkening world. When Europe fractured, the Solidus remained whole, a relic of continuity in a landscape of ruin. But history does not stay still. As the Byzantine flame dimmed, a new light emerged in the east, the Islamic Dinar. Minted in the late 7th century, it represented more than trade. It embodied unity. Where the Solidus bore faces, the Dinar bore faith. Its surfaces were graced not by emperors, but by sacred words from the Quran. There is no God but Allah. It was a statement more profound than design, money sanctified by creed. Under Caliph Abd al-Malik, each dinar held about 4.25 grams of near-pure gold, a standard that remained steadfast for centuries. While the Christian world's currencies fluctuated, the dinar remained an anchor of trust. From the souks of Damascus to the markets of Cairo, from the ports of Zanzibar to the bazaars of India, the dinar became the lifeblood of a vast network that carried not only goods, but ideas, science, and faith. Caravans bore it across the Sahara, ships bore it across the Indian Ocean. With every transaction, it carried with it the language of learning, the fragrance of spices, the designs of architects, and the words of scholars. To hold a dinar was to hold a golden thread linking worlds, the sacred and the secular, the East and the West. It was as much a teacher as it was a coin, and yet as centuries passed, the torch moved again, this time to a city built upon water, Venice. In 1284, the Republic minted a new coin destined for immortality, the ducat. Forged from nearly pure gold, it was as precise as Venetian engineering and as ambitious as its fleets. On one side knelt the Doge before St. Mark, the city's patron saint. On the other, Christ surrounded by stars. But beneath the beauty lay something deeper, a promise that the gold of Venice was as pure as its word. The ducat's purity never faltered. While Europe's monarchs clipped, diluted, and corrupted their mints, Venice maintained discipline. Its mint was sacred ground, its gold incorruptible. Merchants trusted it instinctively, even those of rival faiths. The Byzantine trader, the Ottoman official, the Florentine banker, all accepted the ducat without hesitation. The coin soon became more than Venetian property. It was the lingua franca of global trade. Genoese bankers lent it, Ottoman sultans taxed in it, Flemish merchants saved it. It set the standard for contracts and loans, the silent measure of fairness in a chaotic age. Historians would later call it the dollar of the Middle Ages, but in truth, it was something greater. A symbol of global trust before the world ever had a globe. By the 13th century, gold had woven together the dreams of emperors and merchants alike. Through the shimmer of these coins, humanity found its reflection, proud, fragile, and bound by belief. Each coin was more than wealth. It was civilization, shaped by hand, sanctified by trust, and carried by those who believed that value, once created honestly, could travel farther than any army. As the golden light of Venice spread across seas and ledgers, another Italian city prepared its quiet challenge. Florence, land of merchants, artists, and visionaries, answered not with fleets or armies, but with a coin, the florin. First minted in 1252, the florin was an act of precision and pride. It held 3.5 grams of nearly pure gold, its surface engraved with the lily of Florence on one side and the calm figure of St. John the Baptist on the other. Its purity never faltered. Decade after decade, century after century, the florin kept its integrity even as kings debased their treasuries and empires crumbled into dust. But the florin's true power lay not only in metal, but in mathematics and imagination. It became the foundation upon which Europe's first great banks were built. The Medici, Bardi and Peruzzi families, names that would come to define the age of finance, used it to lend to popes and monarchs, to fund crusades, and to underwrite distant voyages. The florin was not just a coin, it was a key to the machinery of credit, a golden seed from which modern capitalism quietly grew. One florin could pay a craftsman for a month's work, purchase silks from Asia, or secure passage across the Mediterranean. In the counting houses of Florence, rows of men bent over ledgers, quills scratching, their fortunes rising and falling not on the battlefield, but on the balance of trust. The florin travelled everywhere, overland to Paris, across the Alps to Vienna, through the ports of Alexandria and Constantinople. Contracts across continents began with the same phrase, payment to be made in good florins of Florence. Even rival republics respected it. Venice ruled the seas, but Florence ruled the books. The ducat was the gold of commerce. the florin, the gold of intellect. One spoke the language of ships, the other of numbers. Together they embodied Europe's awakening, a belief that wealth could be created not by conquest, but by calculation, discipline, and trust. To hold a florin was to hold an idea that stability could outlast empires. It was, in its own way, a declaration of faith. Faith not in gods or kings, but in the invisible order of trade. That idea would come to shape the Renaissance itself, as art, science, and finance intertwined in the streets of Florence, shimmering like the metal that bore its name. By the 14th century, 3 coins stood above all others, glowing like constellations over a fragmented world: the Islamic Dinar, the Venetian Ducat, and the Florentine Florin. Born of different civilizations, Islamic, Catholic, and mercantile, they spoke a shared language of purity and trust. A merchant could sail from Tunis to Venice, or ride from Damascus to Bruges and pay with any of the 3 without fear. Gold had become the passport of civilization. Each coin carried a story. The dinar bore divine scripture, turning commerce into devotion. The ducat reflected the serene authority of St. Mark and the disciplined faith of the Venetian state. The florin represented the intellect and ambition of Florence, the courage to lend, to risk, to build. Yet beneath their art and creed lay a single truth: consistency. Their weight seldom varied, their purity never wavered. They became symbols of honesty in a world of flux. Through their exchange, the continents themselves were stitched together. Gold from Africa, silk from China, spices from India, wool from England, all met within the invisible web these coins had spun. Money changers in Alexandria, Damascus, and Venice handled them with ritual care, weighing each as if measuring not just metal, but civilization itself. These coins formed the skeleton of what we might call the world's first financial system, a golden network binding faiths, empires, and oceans into one continuous pulse. But gold, as perfect as it seemed, was never the whole story. Most of Europe lived not by gold, but by silver, the quieter metal that rang through the pockets of farmers, artisans, and pilgrims. In the markets of England, France, and the German principalities, humble coins like the penny, the denier, and the groschen defined daily life. Silver was the people's currency, accessible, essential, and endlessly circulating. The English penny, first struck under King Offa in the 8th century, set the pattern: small, steady, trustworthy. The French denier and the German groschen followed, each reflecting the political mosaic of medieval Europe. They were coins of toil and survival, not of glory. Yet silver was fickle. Mines dried up. Wars drained reserves. Plagues halted production. A kingdom's fortune could collapse with the closing of a single mine shaft. Silver fluctuated with famine and flood, its price dancing to the rhythm of crisis. Gold was the metal of empires, silver the lifeblood of humanity. It bought bread, wool, candles, and nails, the things that actually kept life moving. Under the dim light of tallow lamps, peasants counted their pennies, craftsmen weighed their earnings, and pilgrims exchanged silver for the promise of shelter and food. In those quiet exchanges, unnoticed by chroniclers, Europe's economy took root. Every coin passed from one calloused hand to another was a small act of faith, a belief that value could be trusted even when the world could not. If gold built palaces, silver built civilization's foundation. It taught people to measure, to save, to believe in fairness. And out of that quiet arithmetic, modern trade was born. Then came war, the great alchemist of the Middle Ages. It could turn silver into dust or dust into gold. No event tested the currencies of the medieval world more fiercely than the Crusades. When Christian knights rode eastward, they carried with them not only swords, but debt. They encountered the brilliance of the dinar and the discipline of Islamic finance, a revelation that reshaped European economics. To fund these holy wars, kingdoms melted relics, taxed nobles, and borrowed heavily from banks in Venice and Florence. Gold flowed westward, silver drained eastward, and Europe's balance of wealth shifted forever. Each campaign left behind ledgers written in both faith and blood. Venice grew rich, supplying fleets and provisions. Florence prospered by lending to kings who pledged their thrones as collateral. War taught rulers a truth sharper than any blade. To wage battle, one must first command trust. By the close of the Middle Ages, the most powerful weapon was no longer the sword, but the coin. Armies marched on metal as much as on faith. Empires stood or fell depending on whether their currency could still buy loyalty. Money had ceased to be mere metal. It had become politics, propaganda, and persuasion. Every minted coin was a message. Believe in us, and we will endure. In that crucible of conflict, a strange paradox emerged. War destroyed wealth, yet it also forged the idea that confidence, not conquest, was the true foundation of power. Among all the coins that glittered in the markets of the Middle Ages, one endured longer, travelled farther, and shone brighter than the rest: the Venetian Ducat. From its first minting in 1284 to the fall of the Republic nearly 500 years later, its weight, purity, and reputation remained nearly untouched. Empires rose and fell, plagues darkened continents, revolutions overturned thrones, but the ducat never changed. Merchants from London to Istanbul treated it as gold incarnate. Bankers in Florence counted their wealth in ducats. Kings stored them in their treasuries like relics. Sailors accepted them as payment with absolute faith. The ducat had become more than a coin. It was the measure of civilization itself. Its power lay not in mysticism, but in discipline. The Venetian Republic guarded its mint as though it were a temple. Every die, every ingot, every hammer strike followed laws as sacred as scripture. No corruption, no compromise. The gold was pure, the weight exact, the trust unbroken. Each ducat whispered the same vow: our honour is our value. Even as trade spread beyond the Mediterranean, into Africa, the Baltic, and the Silk Road, the ducat's reputation led the way. Other nations tried to imitate it. The Hungarian ducat, the Dutch ducat, even the Ottoman sultani, all modelled on Venice's creation. The coin had transcended language, religion, and politics. Christians, Muslims, Jews, all accepted it. The ducat was not merely Venetian, it was universal. By the dawn of the Renaissance, it had become the silent heartbeat of the known world. Every great cathedral, every voyage, every treaty carried the shadow of its gold. In its unchanging shine, people glimpsed something greater than trade. The first hint of a truly global economy, built not by empire, but by trust. And when the Renaissance bloomed, it did so under the glimmer of these coins. Artists, thinkers, and explorers all thrived on the invisible scaffolding of finance that gold had built. Behind every fresco and every voyage to uncharted lands stood the certainty of coinage that did not lie. Yet, beyond the grandeur of gold, a deeper story unfolded, one not of empires, but of belief. The history of medieval money is, in essence, the history of human trust. From the Byzantine Solidus to the Islamic Dinar, from the Florentine Florin to the Venetian Ducat, each coin carried with it a fragile miracle, the shared conviction that a piece of metal could embody value, promise, and faith. When a Byzantine merchant traded with a Muslim scholar, or a Florentine banker lent to a German prince, they were not just exchanging gold, they were exchanging belief that a promise struck in metal could outlive both of them. Gold and silver became bridges where religions had built walls. A Christian could accept a dinar, a Muslim could trade in ducats. Metal succeeded where faiths divided. It united not through theology, but through trust. Every coin was a mirror reflecting the civilization that birthed it, its hopes, its order, its divine imagination. The Solidus carried the face of empire, the dinar the voice of God, the florin the logic of commerce, the ducat the perfection of discipline. Each coin was not only wealth, but worldview, pressed into metal and circulated like a prayer through human hands. And as those hands passed them along, from Cairo to Bruges, from Florence to Samarkand, humanity discovered an enduring truth. Stability was the rarest and most precious currency of all. For while swords conquered, it was trust that endured. Wars reshaped borders, but coins reshaped minds. The rise of global commerce was not born in blood, but in quiet agreement, in the simple belief that a golden coin would mean tomorrow what it meant today. Even the smallest transactions, a baker selling bread for silver, a monk offering wine for a penny, were acts of faith. Every payment said, "I trust you, and you trust me." That invisible connection, not gold or silver, was what truly held the medieval world together. By the late Middle Ages, Europe had learned its most valuable lesson. A kingdom's strength lay not in its armies, but in its credibility. A mint that cheated its people doomed itself faster than any invader could. Wealth was not power, honesty was, and as the centuries turned, the legacy of those medieval coins survived. When the Venetian Republic finally fell, the ducat standard continued in new forms. The florin evolved into the guilder. The ducat's precision inspired the thaler, and from the thaler, the modern word dollar was born. The very backbone of today's money carries the DNA of those ancient mints. Our modern currencies, dollars, euros, yen, are no longer gold or silver. They are paper and digits, promises without metal. Yet they live by the same invisible law forged 1,000 years ago: trust. Just as a merchant once accepted a foreign coin by faith in the empire behind it, so do we today trust the unseen systems that make numbers meaningful. Banks, governments, economies, all are successors to that ancient contract between value and belief. The medieval world, with its caravans and counting houses, its sacred mints and perilous trade routes, taught us something timeless. True wealth has never been in metal or numbers, but in confidence. The gold coins of Byzantium, the dinars of Damascus, the florins of Florence, the ducats of Venice, all have tarnished, melted, or vanished. But the faith they carried still circulates through every purchase, every exchange, every act of trade. Every time a card is swiped or a coin is passed, the echo of that ancient promise resounds. I trust that this holds value because we have agreed it does. That silent agreement, that fragile human faith, is what turned metal into civilization. It was never the gold that made humanity prosper. It was belief, the same invisible force that bound strangers across oceans, connected merchants across religions, and gave meaning to every shining coin that ever left the mint. The Middle Ages may have faded, but their lesson endures, that civilization does not rest upon wealth or empire, but upon the quiet, enduring miracle of trust.